The old man's hands trembled as he signed the papers. 73 years old, and this was the hardest signature of his life. Harder than the oath he took at 19. Harder than the letter he wrote when his wife died. The bank manager watched him carefully, probably wondering why anyone would empty their life savings all at once. "Sir, are you absolutely certain?" the manager asked again. Thomas Whitmore didn't answer right away. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, stared at the number on the screen. 42 years of service. Every paycheck saved. Every bonus tucked away. Every penny that should have bought him a quiet retirement was about to disappear. "I'm certain," he said quietly. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows. Thomas could hear the faint sound of children laughing somewhere down the street. That sound was why he was here. That sound was everything. The manager processed the withdrawal, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. Thomas stood slowly, his knees aching the way they always did these days. The injury from 1998 never fully healed. Neither did several others. 42 years protecting the palace left its marks, some visible, most not. He folded the bank receipt and slipped it into his jacket pocket, right next to his old badge. He hadn't worn that badge in 11 years, but he carried it everywhere. Some habits never die. Before you hear what happens next, if you love stories that restore your faith in humanity, subscribe to this channel. Real stories. Real emotions. Real heroes. Now, back to Thomas. Thomas walked out into the gray London afternoon. His small flat was 6 blocks away, but he took the long route. He always did now. Since retirement, time moved differently, slower, heavier. He passed the palace gates without looking up. After 42 years, he didn't need to look. He knew every stone, every corner, every shadow where danger might hide. He'd stood in the rain, the snow, the burning summer heat. He'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. His daughter grew up seeing him mostly in uniform, always leaving, always protecting strangers. But that was duty. And Thomas Whitmore understood duty better than most. What people didn't understand was what duty cost. His wife Margaret used to say he gave the palace everything. She was wrong. He gave the palace most things. He kept one thing for himself, his heart. And today, that heart was about to do something his uniform never allowed. Thomas reached his building and climbed. The 3 flights of stairs. His breathing was labored by the top. The doctor said he should move somewhere with an elevator. Thomas said doctors should mind their own business. Inside his flat, everything was neat and simple. A single chair. A small table. A photograph of Margaret on the mantel. Another photo beside it showing a younger Thomas in his crisp uniform, standing at attention, face stone, cold serious. He made tea and sat by the window. From here he could see the orphanage, St. Catherine's Home for Children. 7 stories of crumbling brick and peeling paint. 143 children who had nowhere else to go. Thomas watched a little. Girl pressed her face against the window on the 4th floor. He took a sip of tea and smiled. Tomorrow, everything would change. Asterisk, the decision didn't come suddenly. It started 3 years ago on a Tuesday morning when Thomas saw the notice in the newspaper. St. Catherine's Orphanage was closing. Funding cuts. Building violations. The usual reasons places like that disappear. 143 children would be scattered across the city. Separated, sent to different facilities. Some might find families. Most wouldn't. Thomas knew the statistics. He'd spent his whole career protecting people, but numbers like that cut deeper than any knife. He'd clipped the article, kept it on his refrigerator, stared at it every morning while his kettle boiled. Then he started walking past the orphanage on his evening routes. Just walking. Watching. The building was falling apart. Anyone could see that. Broken gutters. Cracked windows. The playground in the back had more rust than paint. But inside, through those smudged windows, Thomas saw life. Children doing homework at long tables. Kids playing cards. A teenage boy teaching a younger one how to tie his shoes. Normal things. Beautiful things. One evening, he stopped walking past. He walked in. The director, a tired woman named Helen Morrison, sat behind a desk buried in paperwork. She looked up when Thomas entered, her expression somewhere between exhaustion and hope. Hope that maybe this stranger brought good news. Exhaustion from knowing he probably didn't. "Can I help you?" she asked. Thomas took off his cap. "I saw the article. About the closure." Helen's face fell. "Yes, we have for months. Maybe 5 if we're lucky. How much would it take?" "To stay open?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Just pain, more than exists. The building needs complete renovation. New plumbing, new electrical, new roof. We'd need £300,000 just to meet safety codes. Then there's operating costs, staff salaries, food, supplies, ... She trailed off. "Why do you ask?" Thomas didn't answer directly. "How many children?" 143. Ages 4 to 17. He nodded slowly, did the math in his head. "And if the building was fixed, you could stay open?" "If the building was fixed, and we had operational funding for 1 year, we could reapply for government support. Prove we're viable." Helen studied him carefully. "Sir, forgive me, but why are you asking these questions?" Thomas turned his cap in his hands. "Just curious. It was 3 years ago." Since then, Thomas had been planning, calculating, saving even more aggressively than before. He'd sold Margaret's jewelry, the pieces she'd left him. He sold his car. He stopped eating out completely. He fixed his own clothes instead of buying new ones. His daughter called him once a month from Australia. She'd moved there 15 years ago with her husband. She had kids now, his grandchildren, who he'd seen twice. She kept asking him to visit. Soon, he always said. But Thomas knew he wasn't going to Australia. He was going to make sure 143 children had a home. The morning after emptying his bank account, Thomas woke at 5 a.m. like always. Military habits die hard. He made his bed with hospital corners, brewed his tea, ate his plain toast. Then he put on his best suit. It's the one he'd worn to Margaret's funeral. Hal was already in her office. Helen was already in her office, looking more tired than ever. The closure date was now 3 weeks away. The children were being processed for transfer. Siblings were being separated. The older ones, the 17-year-olds, would simply age out into the streets. Thomas knocked on her open door. She looked up, didn't recognize him at first. Then her eyes widened slightly. "You, the man from 3 years ago." "Thomas Whitmore," he said. "And I have something for you." He placed an envelope on her desk. Helen opened it slowly. Inside was a bank check. Her hand started shaking as she read the number. This is £450,000. "Building repairs in 1 year of operations," Thomas said simply. "That should be enough to reapply for funding." Helen stared at him, her mouth open. "Where did this come from?" "My life savings. 42 years of service." "Service to whom?" Thomas smiled faintly. "The Crown. I was a royal guard." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Why? Why would you do this?" Thomas looked past her, out the window where children were eating breakfast in the common room. "'Cause," he said quietly, "I spent my whole life protecting a palace. I thought it was time I protected something that actually needed protecting." News travels fast in a small neighborhood. By the afternoon, everyone knew. The retired guard who lived alone in the third-floor flat had given away his entire life savings. Every penny. To save an orphanage, people called him crazy. Said he should have thought about himself. What about his retirement? His medical bills? What if something happened? Thomas didn't care what people said. He never had. But Helen Morrison cared deeply about what happened next. The check sat on her desk for 2 hours while she made phone calls. Lawyers, accountants, building contractors. By evening, she had a plan. It was possible. It was actually possible. The repairs could start immediately. The children could stay. St. Catherine's would survive. She wanted to tell Thomas right away. But when she called his number, no one answered. She didn't know yet that Thomas only owned an old rotary phone and barely used it. Instead, she decided to visit him the next morning. Helen climbed the 3 flights of stairs to Thomas's flat and knocked. She heard shuffling inside, then the door opened. Thomas stood there in a simple shirt and trousers, looking exactly like what he was, an old soldier living a quiet life. "It's Mr. Whitmore, I wanted to tell you in person. We can do it. We can save the orphanage." Thomas nodded. "Good, the contractors start Monday. We'll need about 8 weeks for major repairs, but the children can stay during construction. We'll work around them." She paused. "Mr. Whitmore, you've given us a miracle." "No miracles. Just money that found its purpose." Helen hesitated, then said what she'd been thinking all night. "You gave everything. What will you do now?" Thomas gestured to his small flat. "Same as before. I have what I need." "But your retirement? I'm 73. How much retirement do I need?" He said it without bitterness. Just fact. Helen looked around the tiny space. 1 chair. 1 table. No television. Bare walls, except for 2 photographs. She saw the picture of the younger Thomas in uniform and felt her heart break a little. "You served your whole life," she said softly. "You deserved comfort. I have tea. I have a warm bed. I have more than those children had before today." Helen didn't know what to say. She'd met generous people before, but this was different. This was sacrifice on a level she couldn't comprehend. "Would you like to meet them?" she asked suddenly. "The children. Would you like to tell them yourself?" Thomas stiffened slightly. "No, that's not necessary. They should know who saved them. They don't need to know anything. Just let them be children." Helen studied his face. She saw something there. Something old and painful. "Mr. Whitmore, when did you last see your own family?" The question landed hard. Thomas turned away, looking out his small window. "My daughter lives in Australia. My wife passed 11 years ago. I have grandchildren I've met twice." His voice was steady, controlled. The voice of a man who'd spent decades standing perfectly still in all weather. "I chose duty over family for 42 years. I missed everything that mattered. Every school play, every birthday, every moment, and you feel guilty? I feel nothing. I made my choices." But Helen heard the lie. She'd worked with children long enough to hear what people don't say. "Those children downstairs," Helen said gently, "they're growing up without families too. Without anyone choosing them first. Maybe meeting you would show them that someone finally did choose them, that someone thought they were worth everything." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "One visit," he finally said. "That's all." The next morning, Thomas walked into St. Catherine's common room. 143 children of all ages looked up at him. Some curious, some suspicious, some already hurt too many times to care. Helen introduced him simply. "This is Mr. Thomas Whitmore. He's the reason you're all staying together. He's the reason St. Catherine's isn't closing." The room stayed silent. Then a small girl, maybe 6 years old, stood up. She had tangled brown hair and wore a sweater 2 sizes too big. "Are you rich?" she asked. Thomas almost smiled. "No. I worked for a very long time and saved my money." "Why did you give it to us?" The question was so direct, so honest, that Thomas felt something crack in his chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time. He knelt down, his old knees protesting, until he was eye level with her. "'Cause every child deserves a home," he said. "And because I spent my life protecting a building, I wanted to protect people instead." The little girl thought about this. Then she walked forward and hugged him. Thomas froze. He hadn't been hugged in 11 years. Not since Margaret died. Then another child hugged him. Then another. Soon Thomas Whitmore, decorated Royal Guard, veteran of 42 years, man of stone and duty, was surrounded by children, and for the first time in decades he cried. The construction started on Monday, just as Helen promised. Scaffolding went up. Workers arrived at dawn. The sound of hammers and drills filled the air. St. Catherine's was coming back to life. Thomas watched from his window every morning. He told himself he was just curious. But the truth was different. The truth was he couldn't stay away. By Wednesday, he was visiting every afternoon. "Just for a few minutes," he said. "Just to see the progress." But the children had other plans. The little girl who hugged him first was named Sophie. She'd been at St. Catherine's for 3 years, since her parents died in a car accident. She had no other family. Nobody wanted to adopt a 6-year-old with nightmares and trust issues. Sophie started waiting for Thomas every day. When he arrived, she'd run to him with a drawing she'd made or a rock she'd found in the playground. Small gifts. The only thing she had to give. Thomas didn't know what to do with a child's attention. He'd barely known what to do with his own daughters. But Sophie didn't need him to know. She just needed him to stay. Other children noticed. A teenage boy named Marcus started asking Thomas about his military service. What was it like? Was he scared? Did he ever fight anyone? Thomas answered honestly. Yes, he was scared sometimes. Yes, he'd been in dangerous situations. But mostly, it was standing still, watching, being ready for something that might never come. Sounds boring, Marcus said. It was, Thomas admitted, but it was important. Marcus, who was 17 and aging out of the system in 4 months, seemed to understand. You think I could do something like that? Military service? Thomas looked at the boy, saw the hunger for purpose, the need for structure. He knew that feeling. You could do anything you decide to do, Thomas said. But yes, you'd do well in service. It was the first time anyone had told Marcus he'd do well at anything. The weeks passed. The construction progressed. New plumbing. New wiring. A new roof that didn't leak. Fresh paint and colors the children chose themselves. The building transformed from a dying shelter into something that felt like a home. And Thomas transformed too, though he didn't notice at first. He started staying longer during his visits. Then he started coming twice a day. Then Helen asked if he'd like to help with homework tutoring on Wednesday evenings. And he said yes before thinking about it. Thomas Whitmore, who'd spent 42 years standing in silence, was suddenly surrounded by noise and life and questions and laughter. It terrified him. It also healed something he didn't know was broken. One evening, Helen found him in the library helping 3 kids with their math. She watched from the doorway as Thomas patiently explained fractions using pieces of paper, torn into sections. When the children left for dinner, she sat down across from him. You're good at this, she said. Thomas shook his head. I'm just helping with homework. No, you're doing more than that. Helen leaned forward. Thomas, these children have had adults come and go their whole lives. Social workers, temporary foster families, volunteers who visit once and never return. They've learned not to trust that anyone will stay. I'm just visiting. You come every day. Sophie waits by the window for you. Marcus has applied to 3 military programs because of your encouragement. The children trust you. Thomas felt panic rise in his chest. I didn't mean to, I know. But you did. And now I need to ask you something. Helen pulled out a folder. We're fully funded for the year, thanks to you. But we're short-staffed. We need someone who can be here in the evenings. Help with homework? Supervise activities? Just be a steady presence. It doesn't pay much. Barely anything, really. Thomas stared at her. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose. Again, Helen smiled. You gave these children a home. Maybe they can give you one too. Thomas walked home that night in the dark. His mind raced. He was 73 years old. He had no money left. His savings were gone. His pension barely covered his rent and food. Taking a low-paying job at an orphanage was possibly the most impractical decision he could make. He thought about his daughter in Australia. She'd called last week, asked again when he was visiting. He'd lied and said soon, knowing he couldn't afford the ticket anymore. He thought about Margaret. What would she say? But he knew what she'd say. Margaret had spent their whole marriage coming second to duty. She'd understood, but it hurt her. He saw it in her eyes every time he left for another shift. Another holiday, another moment he'd never get back, if she were here. She'd tell him to choose differently this time. When Thomas reached his building, he didn't go up to his flat. Instead, he sat on the front steps and looked at the orphanage across the street. Through the lit windows, he could see children, reading, playing, living. He thought about Sophie waiting by the window. about Marcus filling out military applications, about 143 children who needed someone to show up. Every single day and mean it, Thomas had spent his whole life showing up, standing guard, being reliable. Maybe it was time to guard something that could actually love him back. He stood up, his knees aching, and walked back to St. Catherine's. Helen was still in her office. Working late like always? Thomas knocked on the doorframe. Yes, she said, looking up. It's that job, Thomas said. When do I start? Thomas started the following Monday. His official title was evening supervisor, but the children just called him Mr. Thomas, or sometimes just Thomas, which he pretended to disapprove of but secretly didn't mind. The first few weeks were harder than 42 years of military service. Children didn't follow orders like soldiers. They questioned everything. They tested boundaries. They were loud and messy and emotional. Thomas, who'd spent his adult life in rigid routine, felt completely lost, but he showed up anyway. Every evening, 5 o'clock sharp, same as he'd shown up at the palace gates for decades. Duty was duty, even when duty looked different than expected. Slowly, something strange happened. The children stopped testing him. They realized what the adults in their lives rarely were. Thomas was constant. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't disappear. He was just there every single day, steady as stone. Sophie attached herself to him completely. She'd save a seat next to her at dinner, show him every homework assignment, tell him about her day in exhaustive detail that would have bored anyone else to tears. Thomas listened to every word. Marcus got accepted into a military preparation program. When the letter came, he ran through St. Catherine's yelling and found Thomas helping younger kids with reading. I got in. Mr. Thomas, I got in. Thomas stood, shook the boy's hand formally, then pulled him into a hug. Something he never would have done 6 months ago. Proud of you, Thomas said quietly. And meant it. But not everything was simple. There was a boy named Daniel, age 14, who'd been in 7 foster homes and always sent back. Too angry, they said. Too damaged. Daniel didn't trust Thomas. Didn't trust anyone. He watched from the corners, arms crossed, wearing his pain-like armor. Thomas recognized that armor. He'd worn it himself for years. One evening, Thomas found Daniel alone in the library, staring at a book he wasn't reading. Mind if I sit? Thomas asked. Free country. Thomas sat anyway. Didn't say anything. Just sat there, comfortable with silence the way only soldiers can be. Finally, Daniel spoke. Why'd you really do it? Give away all your money. Thomas considered the question carefully. Because I was lonely. And I wanted to matter. Daniel looked at him sharply. You're lying. Rich people do charity when they're lonely. They don't give away everything. I wasn't rich. I was just old and alone. Thomas met his eyes. You think I'm lying because you can't imagine someone choosing you? Choosing any of you? But that's exactly what I did. Nobody chooses kids like us. I did. Daniel's face twisted. He wanted to believe it. Thomas could see the war happening inside him. My dad left when I was 6, Daniel said suddenly. Mom tried, but she had problems. I went into the system when I was 9, been here, there, everywhere since. Nobody wants damaged kids. You're not damaged. You're surviving. Same thing. No, Thomas said firmly. Damaged is broken. You're not broken. You're still fighting. That takes strength. Daniel's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Why should I trust you? You'll leave too. Everyone leaves. Thomas thought about that. You're right. I will leave eventually. I'm 73. I won't be here forever. Paused. But I'll be here until I can't be anymore. And while I'm here, I'll show up. Every day? I promise you that. Promises don't mean anything. Then watch me. Don't trust the words. Trust the showing up. Daniel wiped his face roughly. Whatever. But the next evening, Daniel sat next to Thomas during homework time. Didn't say anything. Just sat there. Thomas didn't mention it. Just helped him with his math. 3 months passed. The construction finished. St. Catherine's looked completely different. Clean, bright, safe. The government approved everything and reinstated their funding. Helen cried when she got the news. So did half the staff. The orphanage was saved. Permanently. The local newspaper heard about it. Then a bigger paper. Then the BBC called, wanting to do a story about the retired royal guard who gave everything to save an orphanage. Thomas refused every interview. "Why won't you talk to them?" Helen asked. "Your story could inspire others." "My story isn't the point. Those children are the point." The story leaked anyway. People found out. Donations started arriving at St. Catherine's. Small ones, large ones, from people inspired by what Thomas had done. Then something else happened. An anonymous donor paid off the building entirely. Then another donated enough for a full-time counselor. Then another funded a computer lab. Thomas's sacrifice had started something. A wave of generosity that kept growing. One evening, Helen pulled Thomas aside. "You need to see this." She showed him the bank statements. "We've received over £200,000 in donations. Because of you, because people heard what you did and wanted to help." Thomas stared at the numbers. "That's enough to run this place for years." "Yes, which means ... Helen smiled. "We can afford to pay you a real salary now. Not just the minimum we scraped together." Thomas shook his head. "Pay the staff more. Hire another counselor. Buy books for the library. I don't need more money." "Thomas, you gave everything, and I got everything back." He gestured to the common room where children were playing, laughing, being children. "I have more now than I ever had." That night, Thomas's daughter called from Australia. She'd seen the BBC website article someone posted online despite Thomas refusing the interview.
"Dad," she said, crying.
"I read about what you did." Thomas, never good on phones, didn't know what to say. "I was angry at you my whole childhood," his daughter continued. "Angry you were never there. But I understand now. You didn't know how to be there. You only knew how to serve." "I'm sorry," Thomas said. The words he should have said years ago. "I know you are. And Dad, I'm proud of you. Finally, you protected something that could love you back." After they hung up, Thomas sat in his small flat holding the phone, 73 years old. He was finally learning what mattered. 2 years passed. Thomas turned 75, though he refused any celebration. The children threw him a party anyway. Sophie, now 8, made him a card with a drawing of a guard standing in front of an orphanage instead of a palace. "That's you protecting us," she explained. Thomas kept that card on his mantle. Next to Margaret's photograph, Daniel, the angry 14-year-old, was 16 now and completely different. He smiled sometimes, helped younger kids with homework, even talked about maybe becoming a teacher someday. "Because of you," he told Thomas one day. "Because of you," Thomas corrected. "I just showed up. You did the work." Marcus had completed his military prep program and was leaving for basic training. The night before he left, he found Thomas in the library. "I wouldn't be here without you," Marcus said. "I was going to age out and end up on the streets. Now, I have a future." Thomas shook his hand, then hugged him. "Write to me. Let me know how you're doing." Every week, Marcus promised, and he kept that promise. Letters arrived regularly, full of details about training, challenges, victories. Thomas wrote back every time, his handwriting shaky, but his words steady. St. Catherine's thrived. The donations kept coming. Helen hired more staff. They renovated the playground, added a music room, an art studio. The children flourished, but Thomas started slowing down. His knees hurt more. His breathing grew labored on stairs. The doctor said his heart was weak. Years of stress and physical demands had taken their toll. Helen noticed. "Thomas, you should rest more. Take days off." "I'll rest when I'm dead," Thomas said. Then, seeing her face, added more gently, "I'm fine. I'll tell you if I'm not." But he didn't tell her. Soldiers don't complain. They just keep going until they can't. One evening in late autumn, Thomas was helping Sophie with her reading when he felt the pain, sharp and sudden, in his chest. He gripped the table, breathing carefully. "Mr. Thomas." Sophie's voice seemed far away. "I'm fine," he managed. "Just give me a moment." But he wasn't fine. Helen called an ambulance. The paramedics came. The children watched, scared, as Thomas was loaded onto a stretcher. "Don't worry," he told them, forcing a smile. "I'm tougher than I look." At the hospital, the doctors gave him the truth he already knew. His heart was failing. Maybe months, maybe weeks, maybe days. "You need to rest. No more work. No stress," the doctor said. Thomas nodded, agreed to everything, then went back to St. Catherine's the next evening. Helen tried to stop him. "Thomas, you heard what they said?" "I heard them." "I'm still coming. You'll kill yourself. I'm dying anyway. I'd rather die doing something that matters." Helen started crying. "Those children need you, which is exactly why I'm coming." So Thomas kept showing up. Every evening. Slower now, but there. The children knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. They just knew Mr. Thomas seemed tired. Sophie stayed closer to him than ever, as if she could sense something ending. One evening, about a month later, Thomas sat with her during reading time. She was struggling with a particular word and getting frustrated. "It's okay to struggle," Thomas said gently. "The important things are always hard." "Were you ever scared?" Sophie asked suddenly. "When you were a guard." Thomas thought about it. "Yes, often. What did you do?" "I stood anyway." Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and standing anyway. Sophie processed this. "I'm scared you're going to leave like my parents did." Thomas's heart broke. "Sophie, everyone leaves," she said, echoing Daniel from 2 years ago. Thomas pulled her close. "Listen to me. I will have to leave someday. That's true. But I chose you. I chose all of you. And that choice doesn't end just because I'm not here anymore. Do you understand?" "No. Someday you will." He kissed the top of her head. "You're going to do amazing things, Sophie. You're going to be strong and brave and kind. And sometimes, when you're scared, you'll remember that someone chose you. Someone thought you were worth everything. And that will help you stand." Sophie hugged him tighter. That night, Thomas went home to his small flat. He sat in his chair by the window, looking at St. Catherine's. Every window glowed with warm light. Children were visible in some, doing homework, playing, living their lives. He'd protected that. Not a building this time. Not a symbol. Not duty. People. Children. Lives that mattered. Thomas thought about his life. 42 years at the palace. 11 years alone. 2 years at St. Catherine's. Those last 2 years outweighed everything else. He thought about Margaret. She'd be proud of him. Finally, he thought about his daughter. They'd talked more in the past 2 years than in the previous 20. She'd even visited, met the children, understood at last what her father had become. Thomas was tired. So tired, but also full of purpose. Full of love, full of meaning. He closed his eyes, still sitting by the window, still watching over the children one last time. The next morning, Helen found him, peaceful, gone, at his funeral. 143 children stood in the rain. Sophie held the card she'd made him, now returned from his mantle. Marcus came back from training in full uniform. Daniel, now 17 and headed to university, gave a eulogy that made everyone cry. "He taught us," Daniel said, voice breaking, "that duty doesn't have to be cold. That service can look like love. That choosing people, really choosing them, is the greatest honor anyone can give." They buried him with his old palace guard badge in his pocket and a drawing from every single child at St. Catherine's, above the orphanage entrance. They placed a plaque. "Thomas Whitmore, Royal Guard for 42 years. Guardian of St. Catherine's for 2 years. He protected a palace, but he saved a home." Years later, Sophie became a social worker. Marcus, a military officer. Daniel, a teacher. Every child from St. Catherine's carried Thomas with them not as a memory of sadness, but as proof that someone had chosen them, had seen them worth everything, had shown them that duty, real duty, is love in action. And in a small flat across from St. Catherine's, now occupied by another retired person in need of affordable housing, there's still a view of the orphanage, still children in the windows, still light and laughter and life, still proof that one person's sacrifice can change everything. Thomas Whitmore gave away his life savings, but what he really gave was much more. He gave hope. He gave home. He gave children a reason to believe someone would finally stay, and he stayed until he couldn't anymore. That, in the end, is the only kind of duty that really matters.